very well. This is the Planning Committee for Friday the 17th of January, the first in the year 2025. A nice welcome break from redecorating the downstairs loo, so we're going to enjoy it. The first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. I've got apologies from Andrew Hart and Jean Warmby. I think otherwise we look like being a full house. Minutes of the previous meeting held on the 15th of November, which unfortunately I had to cry off at the last minute. Would just somebody move those as a correct record? Ginny, thank you. Is that seconded?
No.
I will now take any amendments or issues arising from the minutes.
Okay. All right.
Mike?
Yeah. Just on top of page, near the top of page 8, we approved the application, but there was an LBC with it. Did that need to be minuted, or do those minutes include both items? This is the Oak Hill site, Lower Bradfield.
That's a very good question. Have we missed out a section? Can we help?
Well, I thought it just needed a one sentence, but
So, just tuning into this, was there a listed building application as well?
Was the Oak Hill Hall one? There was a listed building application attached to that, wasn't there?
yeah, there was an LBC.
It's not listed, so it's straightforward, is it? Okay,
Wasn't it on the original?
that's the answer
Sorry.
then, Mike.
That explains that one.
It's very heritage, but it's not listed. Okay. If there are no other comments on the accuracy of the minutes, all those in favour of adopting the minutes, please show. Anyone against? That is carried. Urgent business, I don't have any urgent business. Public participation, that will arise as we go through the agenda. Members' declarations of interest. I think we will all have received an email from Caroline McIntyre about the Kerbar application. Is that right? There is a planning application from the National Park Authority, and we have a former officer of the authority, Jane Newman, coming to address us on a couple of the items on the agenda. Are there any other declarations of interest? Ginny?
Yes, item 9 is an application I've put in, so I shall leave the meeting whilst you discuss that.
Okay, thank you very much. Is that something to do with Hope Show, by the way?
It is.
I should perhaps declare that I'm a member?
I would hope there's a lot of members.
A member of Hope Show, whatever that means. Okay, any other declarations of interest? Okay, then we can move on now, please, to agenda item 6, the development of at Bybury, Riddings Lane, Kerbar. John Keeley, you're going to present this.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. Yes, this is a full application for the demolition of the existing structures to ground level and erection of a replacement dwelling with garage and associated landscaping, package treatment plant, and other works incidental to the proposals. And as the Chair said, that's at Bybury, Riddings Lane, Kerber, which there's the application site plan on the screen behind me. The red area is the application site area, and the other land in ownership edged in blue in the normal fashion. The site is the site of the former bungalow, because the bungalow's been demolished. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. It's situated midway between Kerber and Froggatt villages on the west side of Riddings Lane, just beyond the junction here of Duke's Drive and the Bent. So Kerber's to the south, Froggatt to the north. And some members will be aware the house to the south of it, Brackenburn, was itself a replacement dwelling a few years ago. And you've got further residential property to the north and on the other side of the road on higher ground. You'll see in the slides the ground slopes from the road quite considerably down to the River Derwent, where there is the Derwent Valley Heritage Trail, a very well used public right of way. I'll just zoom in. That's the site as we see at the moment. You probably won't make a great deal, so I'll just go to the next slide, which zooms in a little bit more. So that's what we saw on site yesterday, the remnants of the former bungalow. Just a bit of history. In 2023, we granted planning permission for alterations and extensions to the former bungalow. However, when we went out in connection with the discharge of some of the technical details of the conditions, we found that the dwelling had been demolished beyond the point where it became an alteration and extensions. And as a consequence, the applicant had lost his permission for residential use on the site and has had to reapply for a dwelling on the site. And as you know from previous cases, our policies are quite different between what are engaged for an alteration and extensions application to something that is a replacement dwelling. And where you're replacing something, our policy DMH9 is engaged, which requires a much higher bar. It aims to achieve enhancement to built form, landscape, and the local environment. And where a dwelling which is significantly larger than the one it replaced, that uses the word significant enhancement. So that's the test you have to keep in mind today, is the scheme which I'll present you today, providing that significant enhancement to landscape, built form and the local environment. So we'll just give a little bit more detail about the site. As we saw on site yesterday with the site inspections, takes access down a sloping drive off Readings Lane. There is a large garage just tucked down below the wall level, and you'll see more of that in the photographs. This is the bungalow, and then to the rear of the remains of the former bungalow, there was a terraced area, and then a lower sort of formal garden grassed area with this low garden wall, and beyond that is more grassland leading down to the river. The proposal is to replace that with a larger dwelling. It would be a 5-bedroom dwelling, broadly on the same footprint of the existing or remnants of the former bungalow, but with the addition of a glazed link and separate new double garage on the southern side of that. You can see from that the existing garage remains as well, and there'll be a new terrace and stepped garden rockery down to the lower garden level. Just some size for context now. This is looking south along Readings Lane. You've got the entrance into the site there. You could just see probably just a slight part of the remnants of the former bungalow. This is the adjoining property, and the existing garage coming into view here. That's looking a bit closer from the entrance. See the remnants of the bungalow we saw on site yesterday, and a wider view, so you can see the existing garage and get to see a bit more of the context, and the adjoining property Woodlands, which is fairly close on the right hand side of that slide. So all what you see here of the remnants of the former bungalow will be removed as part of this proposal. And just again to give you context of what the site was like before, this was what stood on the site before from the road view. You can see it wasn't a traditional dwelling, so it's not something we'd want to keep under our replacement policy. And then on the lower side, what it's like now. And this is a view looking up at what the proposal was before. So white rendered dormer bungalow, of which the 2023 consent, which was never obviously implemented correctly, did seek to achieve some enhancements, but that's never been properly implemented. So other view from the driveway. That's another view of what the dwelling looked like before. And the stone-built property behind is Woodlands. That's the adjacent property. Just another view from the road looking north now. That's the existing garage, which would obscure most of the proposal and does show the existing building. That's the footprint. I won't dwell on that because that's what was there before. So this is the footprint of the proposed new dwelling. As I said, 5 bedrooms, 1 ground floor bedroom, there's reception rooms, and to the left of the slide there you have the double garage, and above that would be a further guest room to make the 5th bedroom, linked with to the main body of the house. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms in the main part, and the garage bedroom are referred to. And the roof plan You can see on the roof plan a number of solar panels there. You know, the proposed new dwelling exhibits high sustainability credentials in terms of having solar panels, air source heat pump, mechanical ventilation, a heating recovery system, along with the normal higher sustainability achieved by new build as against retrofitting old properties. Again, I won't dwell on these existing one. So the elevation to the street, this will be the proposed new dwelling. So you can see that it comprises of a two-storey element with lower single-storey part to the right of that slide next to woodlands. It will be built of natural gritstone, coarse natural gritstone with a blue slate roof, ashlar stone surrounds and aluminium framed windows and doors. And they see the short stone-clad link this side to the garage. That's the left-hand side. So in terms of better reflecting local form, you know, going to a two-storey and breaking up what would otherwise be a very long frontage, dropping down to single-storey, is an enhancement over what was there before. And the higher solid to void ratio you see in that, again, reflects our local building tradition. Obviously, from an officer's point of view, we'd have preferred not to see the garage to the left, but that was a key element of the applicant's scheme. Just for comparison purposes, I think this is helpful. I superimposed the outline of the former dwelling there, just to see the difference between what's proposed now in terms of scale and massing. So that's the elevation facing Readings Lane, and bearing in mind it's set down below. I explained on site the roof will be about 2.5 metres taller than the existing ridge line. Again, that's what was there before. This is the rear elevation looking up from the river direction. You can see you've got two projecting gables there, a short flat roof link terrace between the two, which provides a covered area at the back of the property. And again, you see the solar panels, which perhaps have more prominence in a two-dimensional drawing like this than they would have in real life. You've got the link there in the garage. And again, I've superimposed from this element what the previous dwelling was like for context. And gables, again, that's the looking from the Brackenburn side, looking north, and the superimposed former dwelling. So you can see the difference in height. You can see also on this drawing, the perhaps go to the clearer one before. The rear terrace is being recreated in the proposed new dwelling, but rather than have glazed panels to balustrade the terrace or fencing, they've gone to walls which give perhaps rather taller walls than would be desirable. The ground level of the terrace will be a little bit lower than the tops of those walls, and perhaps exhibited by this cross section at the back of the garage more, which shows those boundary walls. So we suggested, in the event of an approval, a condition to agree the details of a landscaping scheme. But I would ask for that to be amended slightly to word it to say something along the lines of, notwithstanding what's shown on the approved drawings, that no permission is given for any the scheme of external landscape works on the drawings at the moment, in favour of the submission and agreement of a revised scheme which makes the best use of techniques to avoid those walls and the landscaping at the back being too dominant in the new design. I believe there is still scope for some landscape enhancement there, and that condition will give us the tool to be able to achieve that. So just move on to the other elevation. Very similar. That's looking south from the adjoining property, where you have the single-storey element first, replicating similar massing to what's there at the moment, or was there, and the comparison between the two in terms of scale. Cross-section we don't need, so I'll leave that there for the time being. So, as the report sets out before you, that a replacement dwelling is acceptable in principle, as the proposal required a larger dwelling. That significant test of enhancement is engaged, and so your judgment is whether you think as officers do this has crossed the threshold to achieve that policy aim. From the officer's point of view, given the design improvements and the pulling the dwelling more in line with the local building tradition, we felt that that level was satisfied, and hence we have recommended approval of the scheme. I think I'll leave it there, Chair, rather than go any further into the details, and be available to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. We have, actually, before I move on, I forgot to welcome Janet Dugdale to our meeting. She's here in her right as chair of the P&R committee. Welcome, Janet. I'm sorry I missed that out earlier on. Kath, I want the speaker first.
I just want to know, I missed the first bit about Kirkby Parish Council. They were against it previously, and it says here the Parish Council have been reconsulted on the amended plans, but it doesn't say whether they agreed to them or disagreed.
Yes, I checked this morning. I believe they've had I think somebody's left all their lights on, so mine won't work.
Mike as well.
Never
That's it.
Thank you. Yes, I believe they've had a meeting this week, but I've checked our emails and our website, and we don't appear to have received a response from them. I have to say, I don't expect them to have changed their opinion, but we don't know. They were fairly strongly against it on fairly clear grounds, and I'm not far from convinced the amendments would have satisfied their concerns. Absolutely, yeah, but we haven't had that communicated to us, unfortunately.
I think we're proceeding on the basis that they will not change their mind at the moment. So let's move on to the speaker, please. Caroline, would you like to take the seat?
Good to go. Morning, my name's Caroline McIntyre. I'm the agent for this item. I'm going to keep my speech relatively short, as the application is recommended for approval and the officer report covers the enhancements delivered by the proposals, including renewable technology and biodiversity. Since being notified that they'd gone beyond the scope of their original permission due to the demolition of unsafe structural elements on site, the applicants have worked with officers to agree a scheme that's supported and recommended for approval. We undertook pre-application discussions with officers in July 24, amending the scheme to respond to comments. We then submitted the application and made further changes to the proposals in December. The clear direction from officers has been that a two-storey dwelling on the site is the only acceptable option, and Peak Architects have therefore created a new dwelling which reflects the character of the surrounding properties with a mix of one- and two-storey elements. The footprint of the house is smaller than the existing footprint on the site, with an adjoining single-storey garage. The proposed single-storey element is circa 1 metre lower than the single-storey part of the adjacent property at Riverdale, and the height of the central two-storey element is comparable to neighbouring properties. The house also sits significantly below the road level, so would not be dominant within the street scene. The use of slate on the roof is similar to the adjacent property at Brackenhurst. The existing garage would be retained and used to house equipment to maintain the gardens. And in any views from the river, the house is positioned well away from the footpath and is similar in terms of its setting to the neighbouring properties to the north. The applicant is keen to restart construction works on the site and allow them to move forward with their home. We therefore ask that you follow the recommendation today and approve this application. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, members, the key issue here is whether the required amount of improvement, enhancement, has been achieved with this application. It's open to members. We did a site visit yesterday. Rachel.
Yeah, I just want to ask about policy HC1, and that's about new housing. So in that policy, I understand what you're saying about achieving exceptional enhanced conservation value, but have we considered the has there been anything submitted that demonstrates that it's not financially viable to have affordable housing on that site? Because under that policy, it says provision will not be made solely for open market demand, and then any proposed scheme that is able to accommodate more than one dwelling unit must also identify eligible local needs for affordable housing. So just would like to know a little bit about that, please.
I think the problem with that line of argument is that there's another policy. I can't remember what the number was. It's written down in here somewhere, which is about what we deal with replacement houses, which is what we're dealing with here. Whereas when we're looking at that policy, we're looking at something that's probably not a house or is just a flat site, and we make that consideration in that situation. I think it's a very good question for future planning policy consideration. It's occurred to me whilst I was reading this report. I think it's a very good question. But we're dealing with policies as they are now. Any other members? Bill.
Just on a technical point, I noticed one of the conditions, should it be approved, is about removing permitted development rights, and I understand that because it is quite a big building replacing a smaller building, and then obviously further extensions would impact further onto the landscape. And does that include, just out on a sort of technical, the site boundaries drawn quite tightly, and we discussed that on the site visit yesterday. Does that include the entire garden, the garden, effectively garden down to the river, because that's quite a sensitive area? Would that include that as well?
I was asking exactly the same question before the meeting. Would you like to address that now?
Yes, that is a very good point, because key to this is landscape impact of the new development, and you see from the plans, the site plan, that they confine the red application site area to the upper part of the site, which broadly the same area as what was the formal domesticated garden before, and the area below that down to the river was, although it was in the applicant's ownership, it wasn't formally treated as or formally gardened as you'd expect with a very large plot like that. So I think it's really important that on the side of bringing under full planning control any extension alterations to the new house itself and the immediate curtilage there, given large outbuildings that would be consented if it went forward, there's an equally and perhaps arguably greater importance of making sure you don't have a individual or a plethora of garden buildings or alterations that could take place within that wider site area, which could harm the landscape setting. I'm thinking here, obviously it would have to be development, and it would be things like fencing, primarily an erection of garden buildings or any sort of significant groundworks. Effectively, we want to see that remain as sort of open grassland, ideally improved as wildflower meadows to increase biodiversity. And the keener-eyed members over on site yesterday would have noted, if you look right to the bottom of the site, next to the footpath, the applicant has erected some fencing which isn't particularly great in the sort of landscape setting. I'm not sure whether that's just for security during the building works, but that's the sort of development which is and can be very harmful. So we can place and make it clear in the wording of condition 10 that extends to the wider site. And bring that under control, which is a very good point. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, because it is it's a much used heritage way in the river. It's a very valuable landscape within this part of the park. So yes, thank you.
I should add, as part of the wider, the alteration I suggested for condition 4, if members accepted that, I would envisage, having as part of that, picking up the landscaping scheme for the site as a whole, and seeking to have a conversation with the applicant and his agent about that fencing at the very bottom in favour of something that's more defensive planting, which would give a better setting for the footpath and the river frontage. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So would that be clear in the conditions? Because when you talk about the site as a whole, will that go in the conditions?
Yes, it would. What you see before you is always a summary. And that's why I wanted to point out to members that rather than just submitting a approval landscaping scheme, which effectively is submitting the details of what they've already shown on the plan, I want to say that notwithstanding what's on the plan, no permission is granted for that, and what we want them to come back with is effectively a whole site sort of landscaping strategy with providing all that detail for the development at the top of the site and obviously a lesser, more sensitive treatment of the lower part of the site.
Okay, I've got Ken Smith next, and I'll come to you.
Thank you, Chair. I was particularly taken with the slides that John showed us of what the bungalow looked like prior to its demolition, because I think in terms of what seems to be one of the key elements of this, which is whether or not significant enhancement has taken place, I think looking at the final slide, which showed the east-facing elevation, the one that will be seen from the road, that there is a significant improvement to what went before. I take Bill's point about the frequency of use of the footpath down by the river, because I didn't have the same kind of satisfactory feeling with the west-facing elevation, which seemed, as proposed, to be a bit more sliding doors and larger openings. I acknowledge that the building, the location is upslope. It's a truncated view from the footpath, and that the majority of traffic will actually be on the road and be seeing that east-facing elevation, which is more in keeping. So I think, whilst that elevation doesn't thrill me, looking at some of the elevations of properties upslope from the road, it's kind of on a par with what it already exists, given the vistas that it is taking in from that side. So on balance, Chair, I'm getting round to saying that I'm minded to approve the application on the basis that there is some significant enhancement of what went before. So I'm minded to support the application.
Could I add to that Bill's point, which is that actually having greater control over what goes on down between the house and the river
Indeed.
is also significant.
Indeed.
It's a very sensitive area.
Yep.
Rachel.
That's essentially the point that I wanted to make, was about going back to what we were talking about with the landscape and how we deal with that through condition. So that area of the garden you'll see from some of the neighbouring properties is essentially wanting to become a wetland, and it's doing a significant amount of flood storage during the winter months. That's really important, so that needs to be taken into consideration. The other consideration is about protected species, because there are waterfoals in that landscape, very healthy population of waterfoals in that landscape, and so potentially, if habitat could be created on that site through wetland enhancement, that would support that local population of waterfoals as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Right, members, you've heard all the discussions. Ginny?
Yeah, I just wanted to understand clearly about the landscaping, and it's what you might call a patio or a terrace. Looks as though there's quite a lot of stonework involved. So can amendments be made to that to soften it and make it less stone?
Yeah, yes. As we looked at the final plans and developed it further, yes, we were. That was a remaining concern. You can see here that if I find the mouse pointed out, you can see that above the chair's head. But this is the top of the patio wall that surrounds the patio area at the back. But the ground level will be down probably about here. And whilst they've tried to soften it with rockery, and this is the architect's drawing, the reality of the detailed landscaping would have to provide more detail. I think what we'd be looking for would be a lightweight railing detail which kept the walls as low as possible and avoided them looking too heavy, but still see-through, and have a more sensitive treatment, or more detail really, of the rockery and the ground levels, which then transition back to existing ground levels, to avoid, when you're looking up from the river, having a sort of the Great Wall of China appearance of walls which are at the bottom end would be well over 2 meters high, which would be out of keeping with the local characteristic of boundary walling.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask one very detailed question? Condition 5, the external lighting system approval. Do we have some clear criteria that we use to cover brilliance and location and this sort of thing? I mean, what sort of tests do we do with that? The reason I ask is because we've got one in our village that has apparently been approved, and it's like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It's a sort of great waft of white light sort of shoots up round it, and he's had to cover half the lights with polythene bags to keep the light under control.
We don't have any actual technical published criteria in any of our design guides, but it's a judgment in each case. And what officers do is we're looking for functional lighting, the minimal amount of lighting, make sure it's cowled to avoid light spread outside the site and upwards into the sky, and making sure it's of the appropriate luminosity to do the job, and sensor controlled as well, so we don't have it on all the time. I'm not saying in this case the applicant's shown on the plans a scheme already, but there is a need obviously outside dwellings for coming to and from the garage lighting, but just enough to do the job without spoiling one of our special characteristics of the national park, the dark skies environment. So it's a judgment in each and every case.
Would be quite a good idea to have some very clear criteria for that, actually. But I'll leave that for the moment. We have the application as it stands. I've heard the discussion. I'm happy to move this application subject to the tightening of the condition on landscaping and those related issues. I'm happy to move that from the chair, if that, and you're seconding it. Has anybody got any further comments or amendments to that? In that case, I'll put that to the vote. All those that are in favour of approving it on the ground set out in the report with those amendments, say aye. Anyone against? You're abstaining, and 2 abstentions. That's passed. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Caroline. Oh, was it? 3 abstentions, apparently. Right. Right. The next application we have is Watergates Pindale Road, Hope, for a manege for small horses. Right. Who's presenting this?
It's myself again, Chair. Yes, again, normally the application site plan is on the screen behind me here. Watergates is a residential bungalow. It's located on the southern edge of the village of Hope. And this is I'll just get the mouse up, if you can see it. It's that property there is Watergates bungalow. It's adjacent to a further bungalow here. They both take access off this lane opposite Hope Church and the junction in the centre of the village, past these properties, which then leads on to a small hard-standing area for horses, which we saw on site, before crossing into effectively open countryside. So you've got grazing fields here, and this is the proposed location of the manege or horse riding arena. I prefer to call them for simplicity in this presentation. There is a small sort of field shelter here, and we saw on site that the existing track leads to this gate here before the field boundary. Of note here, you've got residential property on the main street in Hope with very long back gardens. You'll see in the slides there is some mature tree planting along that southern boundary. And again, the members who were at the site visit would have seen that this boundary here provides a very strong edge to the village of Hope between the urban area and the open countryside. A key feature here is at this end is we've got Hope Mott, which is a raised earth structure, former medieval defensive structure. I'll defer to Ken Smith for any further detail of that, but that's a scheduled ancient monument. Sadly, it's been blighted to some extent by 1960 development, which obscures it from the application site, but nevertheless that's a key constraint in the vicinity of Hope. And we know very little about the wider context of that, which I'll say more about as I go through the presentation. So the proposal is to construct an all-weather riding arena for the applicant who's got these 2 miniature horses and some donkeys. She needs the space for exercise and also to train on. She uses the miniature horses for carriage driving, small carriage driving. You can see there it's sited, just move slightly away from those trees. The idea would be to excavate the soil, dig down, put in hardcore drainage, and then have a sand blinding layer to ride on. There would be post and rail fencing around that, and the applicant's plans suggest, and she's confirmed that she would plant hedging around that. But nevertheless, you can see from that, and you'll see, hopefully see in the slides going forward, it would be quite an incongruous new form of development in the open countryside, which harms the very strong boundary to the village. I'll go through the slides to show the context now. So this is at the end of the existing drive. So on the right-hand side there, you've got the ends of the residential garden. You can see the mature planting there. You can see how that's a very clear edge to the village. There is a high-level footpath to the land to the left of this slide, which gives filtered views through the trees to the village. So the siting of the proposal will be in here, in this field. Just close up there, looking back towards the planting in the neighbouring gardens. And then looking back the other way. So at 40 by 20 metres, this would be a very sizable structure and a very prominent intervention into this open agricultural grazing field. Just further views looking back. And we have given, this is again for context, looking back towards the Watergates bungalow. On that one. So we have given advice to the applicant that whilst in principle the construction of a riding arena is allowable by our policies, that's subject to it being accommodated without harm to the special landscape of the national park and any other local characteristics. And in this case, we've said that the landscape harm we've identified to the local landscape and the edge of the village setting can't be overcome by landscaping, and that we wanted to see going forward this application withdrawn and a revised application put in closer to the village where we believe it could be more comfortably accommodated with appropriate landscaping and avoid the open intrusion that the current proposal asks for. The applicant was resistant to that and also resistant to the need for carrying out appropriate tree surveys to understand the potential impact on trees along that rear boundary. But more importantly, there's no desk-based archaeological assessment of what the development's impact might be upon any buried archaeology in that area. And the applicant again has unfortunately been resistant to producing that essential report for us to be able to make any form of positive determination of an application on this or any adjoining site. So we have had no option as officers to recommend a refusal of this, primarily on landscape grounds. That's the key harm in this particular proposal, but the additional very strong reasons that we don't have those essential reports to understand what the archaeological implications of any development on this or other site might be, and we don't have sufficient information about the impact on trees. So for all those reasons, Chair, we recommend a refusal of this application, but we have heard from the applicant on site that she is amenable after the determination of this to come back for pre-application advice and engage with us further about an alternative site, subject of course to whatever the cost constraints would be, and that would be her decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have, I think, one statement to be read out, I think it is, isn't it?
Thank you, Chair. I would like to take the opportunity to say a few words to support my application for a minute. I carriage drive my miniature American horses and miniature donkey at a highly competitive level, but it is becoming increasingly hard to keep them fit when the fields are wet and heavy going. I tried driving on the road, but quite frankly it was hair-raising to say the least. Last year the conditions were particularly wet, and my little 32-inch horses both suffer from laminitis due to insufficient exercise. It was suggested to me that we apply for an all-weather area where we could train without getting bogged down or risk a terrible accident on the roads. This is a huge project for us financially. We have already spent over £2,000 in submitting plans and the BNG report. I have used the site of the proposed menage for the past 20 years solely for training purposes, as it is the flattest part of the field. We would only have to disturb the top 6 inches of soil in order to create the menage, using kickboards to retain the upper surface. If we sited it lower down the fields, it is on a severe slope and massive groundworks would be required. The other main reason for choosing this site is the national oil pipeline runs through our land. The records you hold for the path of the pipeline are incorrect. A representative from Fisher German has already given the OK for the menage to be sited as our plans are at the moment. However, if it was moved towards the houses, the menage would go over the pipeline, which is not allowed. The representative is coming out today, the 17th of January, to confirm this. The neighbours are unanimously in support of our project. We share our extensive animal family with the wider community, and they bring joy to so many people. The Hope Motte is quite a distance away, and over the years, countless tons of soil have been displaced through our land, both in the construction and maintenance of the pipeline. Several teams of archaeologists have explored the site in detail around and on the Motte with all sorts of high-tech equipment, but find absolutely nothing of interest once away from the original course of the river, which originally ran directly around the base of the Motte. I was a volunteer on one such a project from Sheffield University. The land where we are planning the menage has never been of interest, and in any case, we are only planning to disturb the very top layer of topsoil, not a permanent building on it. I can only hope you consider our application favourably. Thank you. Jane Bramwell.
Right. Okay, members, I mean, there's a problem here, isn't there? Because we can't move forward at all until we've sorted out the archaeological problems. And then there's the landscape problem which follows from that. Martin.
Right. One thing which hasn't come out from the report, but we were discussing yesterday, was the oil pipeline and its position, if it was correctly marked, causes it probably fixes the menage area because you can't go too close to it. So that would need to be, that would need to be part of the discussion in any future application. I agree with the issue over the heritage contents, but we have to accept that some building was done in the 60s, which we would now consider inappropriate without proper investigation. So I would support that the application is refused for now, and that whilst I've got a lot of sympathy with the applicant and wish her and the horses well, I think we need to get a better handle on this.
Thank you very much. Mike Chaplin.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm happy to second Martin's proposal that we do have to reject this application as it is. I do think, though, from the block plans that were displayed, it would have been helpful to have marked in where that oil pipeline runs. I appreciate that it's under the ground, but it is material to the application, and it would have helped members understand better the constraints that the applicant would be under.
I perhaps should say in response to that the applicant pointed out on site yesterday that the oil pipeline people, Fisher Germans, their agents, had been out and surveyed it the day before the site visit, actually, rather than today, and they had marked on with cones where it was. It lies well enough south of the proposal, as it is before us, not to interfere with it. and it would appear from that line marked on the ground that it appears south of the alternative potential site, I should call it, not to interfere with that as well. But you're right, in a future proposal that will be taken careful account of in any pre-app or and marked on plans, which would have been helpful. Thank you.
I do agree, John, and I was one of several members that were able to see that on site yesterday, but there are a number of members here who weren't able to get to the site visits and therefore see where that line ran. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Mike has seconded the proposal, but we haven't got a proposal yet. Are you proposing it? Yes, you've proposed. That is a proposal. That's a seconded. Right. I don't think we've got much choice but to do that, actually, but I think that there is... What's that? I can't hear. Sorry?
Move to vote, Chair.
You move the vote, you say? Yes, can I just finish what I was saying and then I'll put it? I think there's some sympathy, and she needs some sort of feeling that we do understand her needs and it is worth her while putting more effort into this. That's what we're trying to say, isn't it? Yeah. Ken?
I don't disagree with the sentiments of what you said, Chair, but I think that even if we had received the appropriate information to enable us to make an informed decision, I think the location is the wrong place.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to get at.
That's what I think we need to advise on, that an alternative location is required as well as further information.
That is exactly what I was trying to say, but he said it much better. Right, I'm going to put it to the vote now. Oh, sorry, Bill.
Yes, I agree with what's been said. It's not the case of because they were incredibly cute, the miniature horses and donkeys. I have to say the two miniature horses actually looked at what was going on as well. They were very interested. But putting that aside, and obviously the applicant has got particular needs which should be addressed at some point. But this application doesn't do it. It's the landscape point. I'm very persuaded that it's not just about providing for those particular animals, which were very cute, but once you create a menage on that site, then it is open to other use, training, members of other people hiring it for riding lessons and so on, perhaps more vehicles intruding on that site. So it's not just physically what's there, but it attracts a use. It's effectively a change of use. So for all those reasons, any solution needs to take that into account as well.
I agree with you. Right, can I now put it to the vote? All those in favour of refusal for the reasons stated? Anyone against? One against. Or is it two against? Dermot, what? Yeah, okay. Right, can we move then on, please, to agenda item 8, Wheat Hay Farm, Shatton, the proposed conversion and extension of an historic barn.
Okay, good morning. Yes, this is a full application for the conversion and extension of a historic barn for ancillary and domestic use at Wheat Hay Farm, Shatton Lane in Shatton. So the site is a Wheat Hay Farm, a partially extant 19th century farmstead. It is located in Shatton, in a historic cluster of gritstone buildings to the west of a linear 20th century development south of Bamford Road. The site is comprised of an extended farmhouse and several outbuildings. In front of the farmhouse is an enclosed yard with the application barn, an adjoined timber stable and a separate timber stable, which you can see just at the bottom of the plan there. So this application seeks plan permission for removal of the adjoined 20th century stable and for an extension to the barn comprised of a gritstone extension which will be attached to the historic barn through a glazed link. The extended outbuilding will be used for ancillary domestic use in association with Wheat Hay Farm. Now, we had a site visit on this yesterday, but for the benefits of those who weren't there, I'll just go through some photographs. So this is a view of the site from the junction between Shatton Lane and Townsfield Lane. And here's the principal elevation, the south-facing elevation of the barn with a timber adjoined stable there. Just zoomed in one of the historic barn, the gable end and the rear. And here's a photograph from the opposite side of a stream which runs through the centre of the site. So the existing front elevation, the existing rear elevation, this is the gable end with the adjoined timber stable, the southwest gable. We've got a section, existing ground plan, showing obviously the historic barn on the left, the timber stable on the right. The first floor, which is just a hayloft. And here we are moving on to the proposed elevations. So on the south-facing elevation, there will be minimal alterations to the historic section of the barn. There will be new windows and new doors, but they'll be matching and reflect the existing style of a window. In between the two structures, you can see there the 3-metre glazed link. We haven't got any details of that yet, but as it's shown on the plan, would just be a small, 3-metre in length, but narrow glazed link structure. And then you can see the small single-storey extension, which will be constructed from matching materials, so gritstone with gritstone detailing and stone slate roofs. So moving on to the rear elevation, the proposed rear elevation, you can see here a window on the historic section of the barn would be turned into a doorway. We have no objection to that in principle. I think it's a fairly minimal alteration, which would not have an adverse impact on the setting of the barn, the significance of the barn. And you can see on the proposed extension there, so the gritstone element, there would be a 4-panelled bifold door with a zinc canopy and 2 roof lights constructed. So the principal concern with this is the glazed link and the zinc canopy with large bifold doors would be seen within the setting of the 19th century farmstead. We believe that the length of the glazed link would be so that it will be interpreted as a feature in of itself, as opposed to just a simple structure which would allow the two elements to be spaced apart. The canopy and the link would be in such proximity to the barn that it would erode its historic and agricultural character and the overall setting of Wheattay Farm. The proposed materials, including the zinc and the glazing, would appear strident due to their scale and incongruous with a vernacular building palette. I'll just go through the section drawing to show the subdivision of the historic barn. And here we have the floor plan. It shows that the internal building would have various uses, however, they are just going to be ancillary to the main house, so we're not giving those too much consideration. As you can see here, the glazed link is set quite forward on the principal elevation with minimal recess. That's to make use of an existing doorway within the historic barn. And there's the first floor where you can see the zinc roof and zinc canopy. The section here, so as you can see, the proposed outbuilding would be narrow gable, simple form and simple massing. And here we go, another section showing that as well. We have got some just some 3D renditions of the existing site and the proposed site. Just be mindful of these might not show a completely accurate representation, but they just give an indication of what the proposed development would look like. So we've got the existing and the proposed. As you can see, they're constructed from traditional materials. Minimal detailing on the principal elevation of the barn. Sorry, of the extension. The existing southwest gable. Proposed. And here you can see the minimal recess of the glazed link, making it quite prominent, particularly from the street scene to the south. bird's eye view, proposed bird's eye view. It does show that it looks like this has got a zinc roof, however, up for the glazed link, but the submitted plans don't specify that, so we're taking on the assumption that the whole glazed structure is glass. Okay, so we have, there's no highway objections, there's no amenity objections. The principal concern is the impact of the extension on the historic character of the barn and the farmstead as a whole. We think the materials will be strident and incongruous by virtue of its scale. And when you're within the site, even though there's no public access, the glazed canopy would appear to contrast the prevailing form of the farm. So we've recommended it for refusal on the basis that it would not conserve or enhance the setting of Wheattay Barn and Wheattay Farm as non-designated heritage assets. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one speaker, Jane Newman. When you're ready.
Thanks, Patrick. Wheattay Farm is a historic farmstead. While it has been altered over the latter half of the 20th century, it retains its characteristic linear form and materials and a small barn to the front of the property. It is this barn that the application seeks to convert and bring into use as an incidental domestic building, as a pottery studio, gym and occasional overnight accommodation for family and friends. The proposed use will give the building a sustainable use in the long term and ensure that the building isn't lost and doesn't become dilapidated. The use proposed is low impact and would not be harmful to other residents of the small settlement who have written to support the proposal. The report sets out that the link is too long and set forward on the barn gable. This was made 1 metre wider in response to the feedback from the first planning officer, who has now left the authority, who considered that a longer link would allow the barn to be understood in its own right as a heritage asset. The positioning is to make use of an existing opening in the gable of the barn. Regardless of its length, it is insufficiently wide to function as a room. The proposed extension would replace the existing stable with a new structure. The new structure includes an extension and the glazed link. Together, these are smaller in length and area than the existing stable. The existing stable is harmful to the historic character of the barn. The existing permission that already exists for conversion of the barn into a holiday let is a fallback, and this allows a small part of the stable to be retained as part of the conversion, which would perpetuate the obscuring of the gable end wall of the barn and the non-traditional timber materials of the stable. The alternative outcome in the event of refusal than using that holiday let permission is that the stable is retained on site as it is. The complete removal of the stable is not a likely situation, as it provides screening of the main house from the road and creates privacy. No conservation outcomes are delivered in that situation. The proposed extension is in materials to reflect the existing barn. The public elevations have very high levels of solidity, reflecting the local building tradition. This is delivered by situating the primary opening on the rear elevation, which is not visible from any public vantage point. The extension has a narrow gable and a traditional form. The proposal delivers public benefits because it substantially improves the appearance of the site for local residents and also users of the rights of way network, as the primary route down from Abney Moor and Shatton Edge runs past the property. While policy prefers that barns are capable of conversion without additions, in this case the existence of the stable is a material consideration and forms part of the planning balance. The proposal delivers conservation of the barn. The extension is smaller than the existing stable. It delivers heritage benefits by setting the extension away from the barn gable. It improves the appearance of the site by the introduction of more appropriate materials relevant to the setting, and the proposal delivers substantial benefits in line with local and national policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, kick. I'm having a little bit of difficulty with this. We've got these latest set of drawings. One of them is called the proposed bird's eye drawing. You know, these ones here. We don't have one of the other side of the new extension, which would have helped us enormously to understand what it was going to look like. We only have a very rough sketch of proposed ancillary accommodation. So is there some better information about what this is going to look like? It seems to me that what we're saying here is that there's no objection to anything here other than and it's the other than that I'm trying to get to grips with. One of them is the entrance and the glasswork on the new extension, and the other one may or may not be something about the extension between the link between the two buildings. Is that right? Those are the only two problems.
Yeah, that's right. So it's the prominence of the glazed link and also the detailing on the rear elevation of the extension.
The prominence of the glazed wing. So explain that a bit more accurately for me. What are you saying?
So in the street scene, you'll see the barn and then a 3 metre wide link, which will be situated quite close to the front of the barn with minimal recess. I do not think that it would appear as a minimal kind of concealed element. I think it would become an element in of itself, which would contrast the barn itself.
So, I mean, what are you saying? Should it be 2 metres or 1 metre? Or I mean, what are you suggesting?
I don't think it's well, I think the size doesn't matter because that's what's been proposed. However, there may be ways to work through that and achieve something like that, but I'm just looking at what's been proposed in front of us. And I think at that length and at that location in the gable end of the barn, I think it would be prominent and contrast.
And here we're just talking about the link.
That's right, yes. Yeah, for this, yes. But I do also have concerns with the canopy.
So let's move on then to this canopy, which I can't... Does it stick out? I mean, what does it look like? What does it look like?
Yeah, so I'll go on to the roof plan. You know where that is? Here we go. So if you see this one, you can see here that there's an outline of a canopy which would project from the eaves, well, above the eaves of the rear elevation of the extension.
Right.
So it'd appear kind of almost like a hood.
Projecting.
Okay, I'm beginning to get to grips with this now. Jane, would you come back and, because I'm just struggling with this a bit. We're not talking about all or nothing here. We're trying to deal with some very detailed points. And the 2 points we've just heard of must be easily accommodatable, but you didn't comment on them, particularly in your introduction.
So the application has suffered a little bit by having 2 planning officers. The first planning officer made some comments and we submitted some amended plans to respond to that. We then got an email setting out concerns from Will, the second planning officer, to deal with this. And he said he would recommend it for refusal. And we said, well, can we respond with some amended drawings? And we've never actually had a response to that, but it's on the agenda, so I'm guessing the answer was no. But we were completely willing, and we did set out before Christmas, we were completely willing to discuss amendments to the scheme. We can move the glazed link back and put another break into the barn if that's the preferred solution and considered not harmful to heritage. We're willing to discuss the fenestration. We've always said that we're willing to. We've just not been given the opportunity to.
Well,
sounds like we need to.
I think we need to. I mean, I don't know what other members think. I'm going to move this for deferral to have some proper discussions. Anybody else got any comments on that? Ken?
Yeah, I think it's the right move to defer it, Chair. My concerns, along with Will's on the glazed link, which I think appropriately uses an existing opening rather than opening a new break through the wall. So I think that there's room for discussion on that. It's that canopy at the back and the fact that it's zinc roofed that I think there needs to be further discussion on. The elevation on the other side, on the road side, if the reasoning for those folding doors, which I think in themselves are inappropriate, if we are creating or looking to produce something that is in keeping with the buildings that already exist in this farmstead, then that's not the most appropriate way to treat an opening. If it's for light, then I don't understand why there are no openings on the other side to enable light into the interior. I think the canopy is inappropriate. The zinc roof is particularly inappropriate. So I think those, for me, would be the areas that need to be discussed. with a view to resolving them in the context of what Jane has quite rightly described as a coherent 19th century farmstead in traditional materials, in traditional designs, and this isn't a traditional element that's being introduced. So that would be my 3 pence, Chair.
I think we can all agree with that. Matt?
Yeah, I can see that point. It's similar to a situation that we've had before, where there is an existing scenario, and so you can't recreate the 19th century farmstead as in the way that you want it, because there's already something there, and we can't say they've already said that the existing stable is not going to be knocked down. I think the proposal that's come forward is significantly better than what's there already. So I think that we need to recognise that what's there is there, and so we can't say we're going to create something. We're going to go back to what was there before, because we're not going to.
Agree with that. So, sorry, Mike, and then I'm going to say something.
Probably what you're going to say might be more sensible than what I would say, but I do agree with Ken's points about the roof. But it does occur to me there is going to be a trade-off over that the link between the barn and the replacement for the wooden building, because you're either going to have to create a new opening, or you're going to have to keep the link set back pretty much as it is, so that you don't have a new opening from the barn door. And I think we're going to have to bite the bullet on that and accept one option or the other. But my preference would be to keep the existing opening, so that you can still see the view of the barn as it was built in the 19th century.
Yes, thank you. It's been moved and seconded for deferral on the basis, I think, that if you can't agree, it comes back to us. But if you can sort it out, just get on and sort it out. Is that okay by members? Okay, all those in favour of deferral? Anyone against? That's done. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you. We'll be seeing you again shortly, I think. Agenda item 9, Ginny Priestley is leaving the room because she's declared an interest. It's a free-standing lectern style. It's an interpretation board, freestanding lectern style. Gosh, Castleton Road, Hope. Thank you, John.
Yes, I'll be brief as possible, Chair. There's the application site, Marsh Farm. It's located between Hope and Castleton villages. It's a grouping of traditional buildings with a modern farm shed there. And as the Chair pointed out earlier, it is the site, or the land to the north of that, is the site of the traditional Hope Showground. One of the barns has been, within the building group, has been restored using the Farming in Protected Landscape, under the Farming in Protected Landscape scheme, the FIPL project. And this application simply concerns the installation of a lectern-style information board to inform members of the public coming down the public footpath, which leads into the site. The proposal is to put a small information board in that location next to the gateway into the farmstead to inform people about the project. So it'll be just by that gateway to the left on the grassland there. Very simple structure, just over a metre high, angled information board. And on that would be information about the project. This is just a generic sort of style, showing the coloration that it might take. But it's entirely acceptable in planning terms and is recommended for approval, Chair.
Right. I'm happy to move it for approval. Mike?
I'll second it. It's a discrete board.
Anybody got any comments on it? All those in favour? Anyone against? No, that is carried. Thank you very much. Adele, would you like to ask Ginny to come back in again, please?
Sorry, yeah, no, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, I hope, yeah. No, I don't think I'll be.
I don't know why she went out that way.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
We're just waiting for... yes, you can have one now. If you, okay. Okay. Right. Ginny Priestley has returned to the meeting, and the next item on the agenda is agenda item 10, North Lees Campsite, Hathersage. And Will, you're doing this one again.
So this is a full application for the replacement of 2 timber external doors to the campsite amenity building at North Lees Campsite. This has been submitted on behalf of the National Park Authority for their campsite at North Lees. They have an amenity building, as you can see here, and they are just proposing 2 replacement doors. So this is the one of the gable end doors. We're proposing to remove these 2 and install 2 solid panelled doors with grates at the bottom. So here's the existing, and here's the proposed. So more solid doors. And on the other end, there's a solid timber door, as shown here. And we're proposing to replace it with a half glass door. The materials will be timber and painted to match the existing colour of the doors on the site. And there are no design concerns, amenity concerns or landscape concerns. So it is recommended for approval on that basis.
Thank you very much. Again, I'm happy to move this from the chair. Has anybody seconded it?
Top of page 60. There's a public access deliberator. I hope that's a defibrillator.
No.
That's right.
Thank you for that. We will now need a comfort break. All those in favour of approval, it has been proposed and seconded. Those against, that's all carried. Thank you very much indeed. And we will have a 5 minutes break, 5 minutes to 11:20.
John, Jane now as well.
We're reconvening after a short break. The next item on the agenda is the Hartington Town Quarter Neighbourhood Development Plan.
I just wondered if you wanted us to get Jane back in the room because she was to speak to
we have a speaker. Jane is, if she's around.
Can we just check if she's in reception? She might want to hear what we're saying about it.
I'm sure she will. Yes. Are you okay? Thank you. Right, we're just introducing the Hartington neighbourhood plan, and Adele is going to introduce it. You will know each other, of course. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Committee will be aware that since 2011, parish councils in the National Park have been able to write neighbourhood plans for their parish, which once adopted, technically made, they become part of the authority's local plan. There are 7 made plans in the National Park. Only Bradwell's at the moment is wholly within the National Park. The recommendations before you are essentially procedural, but members have expressed a preference for this to come to committee rather than be delegated because it gives the opportunity for you to have sight of the draft policies at an early stage. The recommendations are that you approve the submitted draft plan and supporting documents for the next stages in the process. These are Regulation 16 consultation and then examination. And that the authority's consultation response is delegated to the head of planning and the local plan steering group. The draft plan and supporting documents are available to view as background documents to the report. For information, the Regulation 16 consultation must be undertaken by the authority. We act as consultor and consultee. The examiner must be independent and their appointment must be by agreement between the authority and the parish council. Turning to the draft policies themselves, which are in Appendix 1, I wanted to draw your attention in particular to policies that are significantly different to the current local plan policy. Again, for information, the policy tests that are applied to neighbourhood policies are different to the tests that are applied to local plan policies. The examiner's role is to ensure that they meet basic conditions, and the basic conditions are set out in paragraph 3.8 of the report. One of the basic conditions is that neighbourhood policies must be in general conformity with the strategic policies contained in the development plan. So the neighbourhood policy. Climate change policy C1 requires microgeneration when buildings are extended, grey water recycling and EV charge points. These detailed requirements go further than the current strategic policy. However, it is a live question for us and similar issues are being considered in the local plan review. Housing policies H1 to 3 require a mix of tenures for affordable and market homes to be indistinguishable in terms of design and location on a site, and a primary residence clause on new open market homes. Tenure and primary residence are being considered in the local plan review. Economy policy ED2 is an existing buildings first approach. If a new building is proposed for a business use, an assessment of the availability and suitability of existing buildings inside the development boundary must be undertaken. Policy ED3 prevents new touring, camping and caravan sites, yurts, shepherd huts and pods, and requires extensions or improvements of such facilities to offer landscape, ecological and amenity improvements. This policy mixes strategic and non-strategic policies and this has an implication for whether or not it will meet basic conditions. And it's unclear whether this is intended to apply to the whole neighbourhood area or just the Dove and Manifold Valley. The authority's formal comments to the Regulation 16 consultation will need to address these issues. Economy policy ED4 prevents new shopping and catering facilities on existing campsites. Policy S1 designates local green spaces where new development is not supported. And policy S1 provides for the flexible use of a community facility, provided the community use is not lost and a business use remains ancillary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have one speaker, Jane.
Hi. I don't really have very much to say about this. The community has worked on the neighbourhood plan for a very long time, and they would like to thank Adele and her team for the support that they've given to the community. It's no small thing to undertake a neighbourhood plan. It is a lot of work and a lot of effort, and because it's gone on for such a long time, the community has evolved as well as the Peakland Grange development has been occupied, and there's obviously new people in the settlement, and their kind of needs and aspirations have changed over time, as have everybody's. So they've worked really hard on their neighbourhood plan and finally got it to a point where they feel that it reflects their kind of needs and aspirations as a community and the things that they would like to see for Hartington in the future. So I will leave it there. I have nothing further to add, and if you have any questions, I'm here.
Thank you very much. Members? Right, Matt.
It's probably a question. It's a question about ED4 to ensure the viability of existing retail services in Hartington. New shopping and catering facilities on existing camping or caravan sites will not be supported. Relating to what I wouldn't want to see is us putting in place policies which say you can't do this, which is going to mean that the only people who can go to those sites have to then drive into Hartington. You know, so are there sites that would be affected by that within the vicinity where the only thing you could do would be to drive? You know, so would we be, if we put their policy in like that, would you be embedding car use into those some campsites in that?
Jane?
So I don't think you do, because the campsites that you could travel to by public transport are the ones that are closer to the settlement. The more remote campsites are not easily accessed with camping equipment on foot or by public transport in any case. And it's really a policy that is directing, is trying to ensure that tourists who are using the area are actually supporting community facilities and are actually taking a part in the economic activity of the village, so that it isn't people just driving to a campsite and staying at a campsite and never experiencing anything beyond that campsite and staying on it and then driving home again at the end of it. So that's the aspiration.
Okay.
Issues such as that will be considered when we make a formal response. So the purpose of the committee report today is for you to have sight of the policies, but we don't make a formal response until after the examiner has made his report, taking into consideration the points that we make in the Regulation 16 consultation, which will come after this committee report. So absolutely, we'll be looking at in detail and what the policies say, making a formal response at the next stage.
Okay, can I ask a question? Policy H2, does that override our size policy that we have in our own local plan?
I've not looked in detail at the implications of these policies because that is the next stage of the process. Yeah. But we have to make sure that neighbourhood policies meet basic conditions. The basic condition says they must be in general conformity with. I've had advice from a neighbourhood plan examiner about what that means in general conformity, and we take it to mean that neighbourhood policies should not undermine strategic policies. So that's what we have to bear in mind when we're making a formal response under Reg 16.
So is the size of house a strategic policy? That's what I've never understand.
That's a decision that we'll
we'll it's a good question, is it?
Strategic policies,
yeah. Yeah.
It's a strategic policy, is it?
Well, that's what the guidance is saying about the relationship, isn't it? So actually, the detailed policies, this could fit within that. So actually, could take a slightly different detailed position than the strategic. The strategic was really just saying we have very limited routes for housing, and one of those is affordables, and that can be done in certain ways. But beyond that, I think this detail, this could sit alongside, for that locality, become the core policy.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I wish I hadn't asked, actually, Mike.
I would have thought it referred more to fabric, but I was just going to move the recommendation.
You're going to move the recommendation.
I don't think the terms of that page 2 would impact on...
Right.
Didn't mention size.
Martin, is anybody else? No.
Well, congratulate Hartington on actually having produced a draft neighbourhood plan, having been involved for actually considerably less period than they have. And with the changes which are likely to come in with the new authority local plan, these need to be looked at in view of changes which are likely to come through. So I would second that we approve this at this stage.
Yeah, thank you very much. I must admit, it's got some more interesting policies in it than we've seen in some other neighbourhood plans. I think that's very apparent. Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we note that we approve the report in the terms set out in the recommendation. Anybody else wish to speak? In that case, all those in favour? Anyone against? That is carried. Thank you, Jane, for your attendance, and thank you, Adele, for yours. And we are going to hit 12 o'clock. Right. The monitoring and enforcement report. Andrew Cook, you're going to come and join us.
Yeah, morning. Thank you, Chair. Morning to everyone. This is the standard quarterly review for monitoring and enforcement, which takes us up to, which covers the 3-month period up to the end of December last year. I say it's a standard report. Most of the report format you'll be familiar with. The main difference this time is that at the end of the report, at paragraph 10, you'll see that there's a list of outstanding enforcement notices, which is something I'll come on to shortly. So that's the main difference between this and the standard report that you've seen before. So before I talk about that, just to first of all, just turn to the sort of overall figures which are set out in paragraph 6 to 8 and in the table below. So overall, I think you'll be aware from sort of the last year, 18 months of reports, we've been concentrating a lot of our resources on trying to tackle the backlog of outstanding enforcement cases and also the backlog of inquiries. And this report shows that we're still making good progress on tackling that, the backlog in both of those inquiries and enforcement cases. So if you look at paragraph 6, we have a target of closing 120 enforcement cases each year, and we're 3/4 of the way through the year, and we've already exceeded that target. So we've already closed 139 cases against the target of 120, so that's obviously very pleasing. You'll also see at the start of that paragraph 6, I mentioned that we've been fully staffed since early May, and that has been the case up until very recently. Unfortunately, one of the 2 senior monitoring enforcement officers who joined us in April last year has now recently left the authority, so that post is currently vacant, and we are trying to recruit to that currently. So we're hoping that that we'll be able to fill that post as quickly as we can to hopefully keep that momentum going. In paragraph 7, you'll see mention of inquiries. So these are the cases that are coming in for investigation. So these are things that are being reported to us on pretty much a daily basis. coming in from members of the public or from parish councils or from various other sources. And again, as I say, we've been trying to tackle that backlog, and we've done really well on doing so. The number outstanding, as you'll see, at the end of December 2023 was 249, and that's now been reduced to 114, so it's less than half of what it was a year ago. So that's, again, very pleasing in terms of the overall numbers. So the outstanding cases overall has reduced down to 430. These are enforcement cases. So these are cases where there's a breach of planning control that's been found. And as I say, that's reduced down to 430. At one time, not too long ago, that was well over 600. So again, the direction of travel is good in terms of the overall figures. Just turning back and moving on to the photographs. We've got, in paragraph 5, you'll see that there's 3 notices that have been issued in the last quarter of last year. So I just wanted to show you some photographs of those. So the first case is a piece of land at Grindon off Oldfields Farm Lane. And in this case, we served a temporary stop notice because we were concerned about the works that were taking place. Essentially, there were groundworks, as you can see, laying of hardcore, a track. You can see a digger in the photograph, an excavator. An area was being excavated. In fact, 2 areas of the land were being excavated. That's the other area. And obviously we were concerned about the works. We were also had some difficulty trying to establish contact with the owner because the land had recently changed hands. Normally we'd get the information from the land registry, but the sale hadn't been registered, which is common. It sometimes takes a while for that to happen. So we weren't able to establish contact with the owner, and we were a bit mystified as to what the purpose of the works were. So we issued a temporary stop notice and basically plastered it all over the site. And it did have the desired effect. We were contacted by the owner as a result of that, and work did stop, and we've now got a planning application in for a erection of a stable, I believe. So that will be considered in the normal way. This second case is at Bamford, so it's on the road out towards Lady Bower from Bamford on the right-hand side. And it's the erection of the fence that you can see, obviously, in the photographs. So there are obviously concerns about the appearance of the fence. It was previously a hedge, or most of the boundary was a hedge, and it's been replaced with this rather stark fence. Sorry, I'll just go back to that one. We have, as reported in the, as mentioned in the report, we have received an appeal against the enforcement notice, but we're currently awaiting the start letter from Planning Inspectorate. I was just going to say that. We've also had, as well as the appeal against the enforcement notice, I think there's been a total of 3 planning applications submitted for this retrospectively, all of which have been refused. And the latest refusal was subject of an appeal. So there's an appeal against the planning refusal, and that was dismissed in October of last year. So the appeal against the enforcement notice is on other grounds, if you like. They're not able to appeal on the grounds that it should be given planning permission, which is normally a standard ground of appeal on an enforcement notice, because they've already had the appeal decision on the planning application. So the appeal on the enforcement notice is on other legal grounds, if you like. So that is currently awaiting a start letter before we can get on with that appeal. And then the third case where we've issued an enforcement notice is at Horfield Farm, just on the edge of the park near Sheffield. and it relates to the two buildings. This photograph was taken some time ago when the buildings were not quite complete. You can see the blue roof. That's just a that's now been covered with some roof covering. But the enforcement notice relates to that building with the blue roof that you can see, and also the building in front of it, the circular building, which is a horse training building, I think. Again, we've had an application in that's been refused, and we've got an appeal has recently come in on the 2nd of January against the enforcement notice. So you'll see that at the bottom of that page it says that the notice was due to come into effect on the 7th of January. The appeal was submitted before that date, so the notice has not come into effect. And we've also got an appeal pending against the refusal of retrospective planning permission, as in the previous case, but we're awaiting a decision on that. And then just moving on, we'll just carry on with the photographs. We've got some before and after photographs which I know that members find useful. This is another case actually where we did serve an enforcement notice. It's at Derwent Water Arms in Carver, and essentially it was a former shipping container that was encased in timber. After quite a long time, we managed to get it removed. It took sort of threats of prosecution. We were moving towards prosecution in this case before they eventually did remove it. Obviously the site is a bit untidy, as you can see. There's various bits stored on the site, beer barrels and what have you. But the panels that you can see underneath the wheelbarrow have been removed. They were part of the structure, but they have now subsequently been removed. This is in the conservation area at Carver. It's quite a prominent site in the conservation area. It's not a listed building in itself, but there are listed buildings fairly close by, so it's quite an important site in the conservation area. This is down in Bakewell at the Castle Inn, a sign on the gable end. This is a listed building, and the sign has now been removed. Shame that we couldn't get the rather interesting guttering removed as well. But I'm assuming that's part of the original building, maybe. This is out at Sheen. This was a... let me just see. I think it was being used as a farm shop, this structure. They've subsequently got permission to convert the part of the stone building to that use. So that structure's now been removed and replaced with a Land Rover.
That's a temporary structure.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, this is to the north of Great Longston, for those that know it, Beggarway Lane, property called Underedge Farm. I think Longston Edge is just in the background there. And it's the gates and gate posts, which in that setting, completely inappropriate, replaced a fairly traditional field gate. And the gates have now been removed. I'm assuming that is just a temporary solution that you can see in the photograph. This is another case where we did issue an enforcement notice. It's now been complied with. This is taking a long time. You can see from the reference it's a 2014 case, so it's been going on for quite some time. And the structure that you can see was a temporary dwelling, I hasten to say. When I say temporary, it's been there a long time. But it was subject to a temporary permission for part of that period, because there was a permission for erection of a new dwelling, which was taking a very long time to build. So the owner of the property was living in that temporary dwelling whilst he was carrying out the work to build the new dwelling. That's a photograph taken recently of the site that's been cleared, and the new dwelling is now complete and occupied. This is on the National Trust Longshore Estate, just below the car park, for those that know it, the main car park. Again, this was a building that was granted a temporary permission some years ago. It wasn't removed at the end of that period, and I think they actually repurposed it as a bookshop. It was originally designed to be a temporary base for rangers, I believe, National Trust rangers. And it's now been removed. That photograph was taken this week. Another one where we had to issue an enforcement notice. There was an appeal against the enforcement notice that was unsuccessful. So this was a newly built building that was being used as holiday accommodation out at Holland, near Hollinsclough. And there's the site cleared. The building was just to the left, actually. We haven't got a very decent photograph of the site where the building was. But also as part of the enforcement notice, the wall to the right of that photograph, or near the right-hand side, was required to be rebuilt. They'd put a new access in, so that was required to be rebuilt. The material that's on the ground there was put in as part of the development. Some of that's now been removed, and you can see the grass coming through. They've also grass seeded, so hopefully that will green up as we go forward. Okay, so those are the photographs. As I say, I just wanted to come back to the list of enforcement notices at the end of the report, at paragraph 10. So this is something that members have asked for previously, and we've provided for the first time. This is a list of enforcement notices that are still extant, that have been issued, some of them a very long time ago, and yes, I think in one case in the 1980s. Yeah. So we just wanted to present this to members as a list of enforcement notices that are outstanding and have not been complied with, either fully or partly, in some cases. It's not intended that we have a discussion about the individual cases, partly because there are obviously quite a number of them, and also because in some cases it wouldn't be appropriate to discuss the details of the case in a public meeting. So what we've done is just present this at the moment as a list of cases. If members individually want to question any of the cases, then we'd quite happily take those questions outside of the committee. So maybe if you wanted to, perhaps Adam would act as a kind of contact initially. So if you wanted to either email or contact Adam about any of those cases, and then he can pass that on to myself or whoever's appropriate to deal with it. And we can provide a response as to what the current state of play is, etc. But the intention is to continue to report this to future committees on a quarterly basis and provide updates where we can. And if we have to, then we would provide those updates under Part B rather than under Part A, because, as I say, some details we wouldn't be able to present into a public meeting. So I'm hoping it's of use just to show the scale of what we're dealing with in terms of outstanding enforcement notices. But other than that, I didn't want to say any more at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Members, any questions or things? Got Ginny, then Matt.
I
And then Ken.
I just want to compliment Andrew on the hard work that's been done. I think we recognise the position we were in a year ago, and there's been an enormous amount of work done, and thank you for your efforts.
Thank you. Matt.
Yeah, I agree with that. one of the issues around having targets around numbers is that one goes for the ones which are going to happen more quickly. Are there ways? How do we set the? How do you prioritise the ones? How do you prioritise which ones that you look at?
Essentially, we use the local enforcement plan. The local enforcement plan sets out what our priorities are, and as you'd expect, that closely mirrors what's in the development plan. What our purposes are. The developments that are having the most significant visual impact or other impact are the ones that we try and use our resources on as much as possible to try and resolve those more quickly. Doesn't always work out that way because we're sidelined by other issues, but that's the starting point.
And we had the enforcement plan, what, about 6 months ago, I think, wasn't it? We had it in front of us with the priorities in it then. Any other members? In that case, should I move that the report be Ken, I beg your pardon. You did put your hand up.
It was just a question about them temporary buildings. When they're told to shift it, is it in a boundary of the property or just to another part of property?
Where we grant temporary planning permission, you mean?
No.
Or
No, you showed you one there, it was being used as a holiday let, and then it was completely gone. But was it completely gone from the property or just to another part of property?
Yeah, normally we would, when we issue an enforcement notice, we have to specify the area that's covered by that notice. So if we're concerned that somebody might move something from one part of the land to another, we would include the whole of the land holding in the enforcement notice to make sure that doesn't happen.
But it might still put it on somebody else's land, of course. But, right. Any other members got any questions or issues? In that case, I'll move this report be noted. Is that seconded? Thank you. All those in favour of noting it, thank you. And we'll move then on to the appeals report, agenda item 13 on page 87. I said earlier to the officers, I've never seen a list as long as this of appeals and decisions since I've been on the authority, and that's for some time. But the appeals are going fairly well, aren't they, on the whole, until one recently. And we just have to deal with these. Why do we think there's an increased number of appeals coming up?
I think there's a couple of reasons. Last year, the government removed the ability for applicants to have a free resubmission.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
So I think that's one factor. You don't necessarily have as much of an incentive to resubmit. And it's also part of just government guidance has switched that more negotiation should take place during pre-app is what the government tells us to do. So if we have any significant issues with applications, generally speaking, we will point people in that direction. Now, in the past, when we have that conversation with applicants, they would quite often withdraw their application because they knew they had a free go. But now, they've not got that incentive, so they might just think, okay, well, we've gone this far, we'll submit appeal ourselves and see what happens with that first. I think that's probably the biggest reason.
So that's not been helpful, has it? We need to bear that in mind. I think if I'd realised that, I might have taken a different view on an earlier application, actually. Okay, anybody got any comments on this report? Mike?
No, I was just trying to make sense at the top of page 89. It's an application that was dismissed on the agenda, which is good to see that the authority is winning most of the cases. It's just the reasoning didn't quite make sense to me, because the final sentence says the proposal would also conflict with RT2 of the core strategy. But the first part seems to go in the other direction, because the inspector was saying that it did not harm the landscape setting. Was that right in the reasoning? It's just, if I was writing the sentence, I wouldn't write it that way.
Well, this is a policy we always have some difficulty with, actually, and we have had it in the past. It's partly because of the way it's worded, but that does actually make sense in the context of the policy. That's the best I can say.
Yeah, I mean,
we need to get it clarified when we go through the local plan
That's an
process.
interesting appeal decision because that comes down to the principle of which buildings you should be granting for conversion to holiday accommodation and what does traditional building mean, which we've tried to define in development management policies. This inspector went down the policy line and agreed with us, but it's interesting because a few months before, an inspector in very similar circumstances did the polar opposite, which is frustrating from a planner's perspective, obviously, because you look to appeal sometimes for guidance about how to apply things. So it'll be interesting when another one comes along. I'm sure there will be.
Right. Any other issues on that? In that case, I move that that report be noted. Seconded. All those in favour? All those against? Right. That's carried. Thank you very much. And that concludes the meeting at 2 minutes to 12.